Hello YouTube. It's time to tell you about a very interesting paranormal phenomenon in modern Russia that goes back to the old Soviet Union, and it's never gone away in the years that have gone by since the change in the country's leadership and ideology. There are countless secrets that lay hidden under the former Soviet Union. Digger in English, which means one who digs. There are people in Russia who have borrowed the word, changed it slightly, and call themselves Diggeri, or Diggeri in Russian. Theirs is a cryptic world. They have their own traditions, philosophy, and experiences. The Diggeri explore Russia's subterranean world. They quite frequently find incredible things. Their explorations of the gigantic subterranean structures of Moscow have been exposed and written about since the fall of the Soviet Union. But the Diggeri are found all over Russia, as well as the former Soviet republics. Most of their reports are hidden from curious journalists. They don't want to mess with the police, and they do find a lot of unusual things. For example, the story of the giant rats. I will not discuss in this video my findings about Soviet experiments with the so-called superintelligent rats. That's the subject of a special video. But we do need to mention a few things here. Some consider the tales of the Diggeri about rats to be legends, but the reports of gigantic rats that populate underground Moscow have been confirmed more than once. Vadim Mikhailov, one of the founders of the Muscovite Diggeri, and his comrades encountered the beasts in the tunnels under the city's zoo. There were 5 gigantic rats, and the Diggeri saved their lives by tossing metal rods at the monsters and fleeing the scene. The explorers have been descending into the subterranean world for 19 years prior to that event and had never encountered anything similar. The mutants, as Mikhailov described the rats, were about 65 centimeters long, not counting the tails. One was probably a female, for the proportions were smaller and its color was lighter. The Diggeri immediately alerted the city government, notified television media, and reported the location to the police. The authorities closed the tunnels only 4 days later. The rats were observed in the tunnels leading to the zoo, the American embassy, and the Russian White House, the parliament. Several days later, the Diggeri, in their headquarters, received anonymous phone calls from people who claimed to be former Soviet military officers. They provided detailed descriptions of the entrances and passageways to the military underground bunkers that formed the defensive complex under Moscow and its vicinity. The abandoned structures were located next to spent nuclear fuel storage casks. This is where many uncanny events have taken place. If the former officers are to be believed, there have been thousands of gigantic rats below Moscow. Their description to what Mikhailov and his Diggeri observed under the zoo is identical. The explorers were eager to undertake an expedition to the storage casks, but would do so only when they obtained actual weapons. Of course, there are other entities. Mikhailov described the subterranean life forms he and his colleagues have encountered through the years. There were bags, crawlers, something called gluki, and other ghostly phantom-like formations. There are small stars that appear suddenly from the surrounding darkness and extend their tentacles towards people as if trying to emit energy. The term used by Diggeri is underground adrenaline. Sometimes at great depths under the city, diggers see illumination from flashlights at the other end of a tunnel. But who else would dare go down so far under the surface? When diggers approach the flashlights, they go out, leaving nothing but silence. In the old abandoned tunnels, diggers found strange mysterious signs on the walls. Who drew them? When and why? As they wandered in the tunnels under an old cemetery, the diggers observed ephemeral, ghost-like creatures that extended their arms towards the explorers and then fell into the floor of water. Mikhailov mentioned the so-called chokhriki, or tiny creatures that appear on the photographs after the films used underground are developed. He doesn't believe that this is an optical illusion. The diggers are not indifferent to the mystical world. Once they decided to confirm the legend of the White Nun. There was the monastery called the Nikolaevsky near the Russian city of Ryazan. The communists closed it and built a young pioneer summer camp at the site. Young pioneers was something like Boy Scouts under communist ideology. According to local legend, the abbess cures the camp and along with a few other nuns physically walled themselves off behind the walls of the abbess's house in the 1920s. Strange phenomena have been observed in the area of the camp ever since. Before storms, the sound of a bell comes from underground, and singing by the walled-off area, women have been reported. After that, the ghost of the White Nun appears. It is 2 or 3 meters tall and walks from the site of the old church to the abbess's house. The sighting is not frequent. The White Nun is sighted only at night, but many people have seen her. When Mikhailov's Diggeri arrived at the site and during their stay they saw the ghost 3 times. Usually they do not investigate mystical reports and legends, but in this case they decided to proceed. They discovered an underground passageway that led to the abbess's house, which was underground by then. The passageway was located under the alley where the White Nun was sighted, but getting inside the burial area was not that simple. Flashlights went out, the video cameras stopped working, and bricks from inside the burial site flew out straight at the Diggeri. The first of the group who entered the site fainted for several minutes and had to be dragged out by his colleagues. Mikhailov's people call themselves diggers of the underground planet. It is worth mentioning here that they also discovered Ivan the Terrible's lost torture chamber, catacombs and passageways, a pond that was allegedly the site of a mass suicide, and a strange site under the Sukharevskaya Square in Moscow. There are so many more abandoned industrial locations around Moscow for them to explore, so many secret tunnels and mysterious offshoots of the enigmatic Moscow subway system to map, that I'm certain that we're going to hear more from Mikhailov, his Diggeri, and also a number of other groups that operate under Moscow, trying to find old abandoned structures, secrets, and much more. And the government is not too happy about it, but that's another story. Now let's go on to Latvia. Diggeri in the Latvian city of Riga recently discovered a gruesome medieval prison under the city. It was located underneath Kalkiu Street, and according to legends it was where the plague originated to engulf the city in the 14th century. The journalists who accompanied a local Diggeri to the underground dungeons reported strange feelings of being watched by thousands of unseen eyes. This is where the thieves, adulteresses, and murderers were tortured before their execution. There are numerous passageways that lead to unexplored areas of the old city. German historian and SS member Otto Rahn, who studied the history of the Knights Templar and Hitler's orders, believed that the Knights had concealed their treasures somewhere in Latvia. According to Rahn, the subterranean vaults of Riga, as well as certain Latvian castles, were built according to the sacred geometry of the Knights Templar. Local Diggeri are aware of the hypothesis. Some Latvian journalists are of the opinion that the German scientists were onto something interesting. Rahn was a protege of Himmler, and he died a mysterious death at the age of 35 in the Tyrolean mountains. An enigmatic person, he was known for his study of the Cathars, the Mont Segur, and other secrets. Sometimes the Latvian Diggeri would find forgotten Soviet missile silos, such as the one in the remote province of Aleya, 10 kilometers from the border. The most valuable equipment have been taken away by the teams of the so-called Black Pathfinders years before. Konstantin Buglov, perhaps the most famous of the Latvian Diggeri, was also exploring the sinister Zvartskaya zone, where the Soviets tested their secret weapons for 50 years. Also, there are diggers of the Russia's battle sites. They're called the Black Pathfinders and Trophy People. Digging through the vast lands of the former USSR, they frequently find mass graves dating back to World War II. They disturb the peace of the deceased, and some of them, not many are willing actually to talk about such matters, recall unusual, terrifying visions. The variety of the subterranean exploration began in the late 1980s. Excavations of the military cemeteries were illegal, but the country was falling apart and enforcement of the law was weak. But even in such a distant period as 1970s, there was a case of some hunters who met an elderly woman near the Sinyavsky Heights, where fierce battles have taken place almost 30 years before. The woman told them that she had lived in the area before the war and was now searching for some village cemetery. As they exchanged goodbyes, the woman read the fortune of these people that she met and then left. Some minutes later, the hunters, people who she met, noticed that she left no footprints in the snow. The trophy people report that when they conduct their excavations of the military cemeteries during spells of warm weather, all of a sudden rain would pour down on them. In 1985, something inexplicable occurred over the German military cemetery in the Mikhailovskaya settlement. The day before, some black pathfinders had operated in the area. At night, a thin ray of light would suddenly emit from a strange apparatus hovering in the sky. All of the village dogs started barking wildly, while the power outages cut off the flow of electricity to the settlement. Some 15 minutes later, the ray vanished and the mysterious apparatus departed. Half an hour later, 2 military aircraft flew very low over Mikhailovskaya. No one had ever seen such planes there before. One episode took place in the Novgorod region when a group of Diggeri approached a German military cemetery behind a small village. The weather was freezing, although the snow had not yet fallen. Suddenly they observed a white silhouette of an indefinite shape, about 3 meters tall, rising from the corner of a house in the village. The distance between the pathfinders and the ghost was about 70 meters. The mysterious shape slowly and noiselessly moved in the opposite direction, away from the astonished Diggeri. About every 15 meters, the ghost would stop and alter its contours or outlines. At first, it looked like a gigantic cow, then a horse, and finally a man. Changing its shape in this manner, the ghost noiselessly crossed the field and vanished into the forest. In the Pskov region, the Diggeri wanted to excavate another abandoned German cemetery. As night approached, they saw an unusual black animal pacing up and down the river bank. The animal was something of a cross between a wild boar and a bear. It disappeared when the Diggeri surrounded the bush where it was hiding. In 1988, some Diggeri in Belarus approached a mass grave. During the war, many locals were executed and buried in such places. In the twilight hours, the Diggeri saw a man walking toward them on an abandoned village road. He wore an expensive suit and had a shapeless black stain instead of a face. He stopped some 15 meters from the trophy people, who shouted greetings to him. Suddenly the stranger moved sideways and noiselessly vanished in the roadside vegetation. The pine trees that grew at the side of the road were less than 30 centimeters apart, and it would have been quite impossible for a human being to crawl through them silently. In 1997, a group of Diggeri was on its way near the ruins of the Makaryev Monastery near Luban. The monastery was completely destroyed during the war. Only the foundations were left in the middle of the marsh. The site was considered cursed by the Diggeri. When 6 of them approached the ruins in the twilight hours, they noticed a campfire up ahead. It was floating in the air. They had a very restless night. From 3 to 5 a.m. they heard blood-curdling human screams in the forest. The impression they had was of something being torn apart alive. One of the Diggeri, who left for a few minutes to relieve himself, came back after 3 hours. He was scared, terrified of what he saw in the forest, but never told anyone what had actually happened to him. Among Latvian Diggeri who officially searched for weapons of World War II, for museums, for instance, there was a belief that one who finds and doesn't properly rebury the remains of fallen soldiers, he would have a bad luck. Such official Diggeri in Russia, Latvia, and elsewhere very much dislike the so-called trophy people, who are better equipped and behave like barbarians. The black pathfinders, for the most part, throw away the remains of fallen soldiers they encounter during their illegal excavations. It is weapons that interest the trophy people. They find eager buyers for the well-preserved arms and equipments. They find those buyers abroad. They also, back in the 1990s, would even sell unearthed tanks, the ones they found in the ground and brought up. There are many groups in Russia and neighboring countries who look for the forgotten cemeteries of World War II, so that they can preserve memory of the people who had fallen fighting for their country, so they can rebury the soldiers and find the names of those that perished in the bloodiest war of the 20th century. Sometimes their paths cross those who desecrate the memory and resting places of the fallen soldiers for monetary gains. Then there is a group of you can call them Diggeri, but they're actually raiders of Russia's attics. That's another category. They explore the countless attics of Russia's aging buildings. The professionals research reference books and archives before they target a specific building. Their findings are often quite valuable. Abandoned treasures, weapons, medals, coins, and so on. You see, and I remember this when I was a young person in the Soviet Union. You can find quite a lot in those attics because revolutions, wars, invasions, and other bloody events rocked the Russian Empire and Russia and other countries in the bloody 20th century. People who would look, for places to hide their valuables would look definitely in the attics and the dungeons. Also, there were soldiers who came home from the front and had to conceal their trophies, things they brought back from foreign countries. The attics above their apartments very often served the purpose. Later, some of those who would hide their treasures and belongings were arrested, sent to another war, for example, or simply would become forgetful in the old age. Yet the valuables remain hidden in the attics. That's until the Diggeri came up the stairs. In the major cities of Russia, the attics have been cleaned long ago. That's why the Diggeri would embark to explore smaller cities and towns. There they still find jewelry from bygone times, coins, imperial swords, and much more. But they also found concealed corpses, drug paraphernalia, of course, and victims of suicides, disease, and other causes. To dig through the age-old trash is seldom healthy, and Diggeri find TB as often as ancient coins. The Diggeri also report eerie encounters, but they are very reluctant to go into details. Their folklore is also full of stories about attic Diggeri who found sizable treasures, and that's what drives them to go on. Thank you.